Hello and welcome to our lesson today on Judith Jarvis Thomson's classic article, Defense of Abortion. Today we're going to look at this issue in ethics and science, particularly in the medical field in regards to abortion. And one central issue in the abortion debate is on this issue of personhood, about what it is to be a person, whether a fetus is a person or not, where a person has full moral rights, like the right to life. So the abortion debate has been about personhood, or what makes something an end in itself with full moral rights. And any fine line drawn, Judith Jarvis Thomson says, any fine line drawn will be arbitrary, although there may be concrete cases. So if we try to find a strict definition of what it is to be a person, such as having complex cognitive rational capacities and or the capacity to feel emotions, etc., when we try to draw a line, this will be something that will be arbitrary and very difficult to do. And we can point out concrete cases of things that do have personhood status. For example, a grown adult, a normal, psychologically normal human adult, does have personhood with full moral rights. However, a stone or rock on the ground does not have personhood. So we can point out to some concrete cases of things that do have personhood and things that do not have personhood. However, trying to actually come up with a strict definition for what it is to be a person or not, she does not want to get into this kind of debate. She does not think it's a very fruitful debate. So as we're going to see when we get through her article, she's not going to try to come up with a definition for what it is to be a person. However, before proceeding, she comes out with this initial thought, and this is just an initial thought. She doesn't actually back this up with further argument. She just kind of throws it out there and just leaves it out there. But she says something like this: we cannot claim that an embryo is a person at conception any more than we can claim that an acorn is an oak tree. So I'll leave you to think about that initial thought and whether you think that is right or not. All right, so next what Thomson does is she defines what she calls the extreme view. The extreme view is where abortion is always wrong, no matter what. All right, so she considers this to be the extreme view. And she only argues against the extreme view. So the purpose of this article for her is just to argue only against this extreme view. So all she has to do is show that there's one case where abortion is morally permissible in order to argue against the extreme view, because the extreme view says that abortion is always wrong. And her strategy is that by assuming that a zygote is a person, she claims that some cases of abortion are morally permissible. So once again, there's this huge debate about whether or not a fetus is a person or not. And she doesn't want to get into it. But so what she's going to do is she's just going to grant, for the sake of argument, that a fetus is a person. She's going to grant completely for the sake of argument. You can just assume that a fetus is a person. And she says she will still be able to argue and show that there are some cases of abortion that are morally permissible. Okay, so next she puts out on the table a common pro-life argument. And the first premise of this argument is this: it's that a fetus is a person. And the second premise is that a person has a right to life that outweighs a mother's right to her body. So in virtue of P1, that a fetus is a person, we can say that a fetus is a person. And given that the fetus is a person, well, the second premise lays out that a person has a right to life that outweighs a mother's right to her body. Right? A mother can be said to have a right to her body and have a right to make decisions about what happens to her body or not, however, such as have an abortion, but that right to her body is outweighed in the case of an abortion by the right to life of a person, in this case, a fetus. So therefore, abortion is immoral. All right, so this is a common argument for pro-life. Okay, so let's now get to Thomson's first objection. And what she does is she attacks the second premise. And she attacks the second premise by bringing up this kind of hypothetical experiment, this kind of thought experiment that's supposed to be analogous to certain cases of abortion. And this kind of hypothetical thought experiment involves a violinist. So imagine there's a famous violinist who is about to die, but if their body or their circulatory system is somehow hooked up to a healthy person's body, then let's say a particular healthy person's body, namely you, then they can continue to live. And let's say in the middle of the night, the fan club of this violinist comes in the middle of the night and steals you away and hooks you up to the violinist. So you're attached to the violinist. And let's say you need to be attached to the violinist for 9 months. And let's say it's your liver. And this will help the violinist recuperate, and it's only you that can help this violinist. So in this situation, is it the case that you can detach yourself from the violinist in this case? You might think, well, I have a right to my body, and I was kind of stolen in the middle of the night away and hooked up to this violinist. So I have a right to detach myself from this violinist and go about living my ordinary life. However, remember, the second premise says that a right to life outweighs the right to decide what you can do with your body. So if that's right, then that means the violinist has a right to your body, has a right to be attached to your body in this particular case for those 9 months. And where this time period of 9 months is supposed to mimic the average pregnancy of being the term of 9 months. So the idea here is his right to life, though, does not outweigh your right to your body in this situation. Actually, when you think about this hypothetical situation, Thomson says it's very clear that your right to your body outweighs the right to the violinist to be hooked up to your body in order to continue to live. So what Thomson says is that this is analogous to abortion rape cases, cases where a woman has been raped through no fault of her own, just like in the violinist case, you have been stolen away in the middle of the night against your will and attached to the violinist. Likewise, a woman is carrying a child against her will, and she would like to have an abortion. Well, argument by analogy, just as in the violinist case, you're allowed to, it's morally acceptable for you to detach yourself from the violinist. Likewise, in cases where a woman has been raped, it is morally permissible for her to have an abortion. So Thomson argues, thus abortion in such cases is morally permissible. And so now I'll give you time, or you can press pause to think about whether or not you agree with this argument, whether or not you think it works, or whether or not you think there are problems with it. Okay, so let's get to her second objection. She says this: a mother will die if she gives birth. So she is now discussing cases where a mother's life is at risk. And there are real life cases like this, where a mother will likely die if she carries the child to term. So in this situation, is it morally permissible for a mother to have an abortion in this particular case? And Thomson points out that both have a right to life, but the mother has an additional right to make decisions about her body. So in this situation, the mother's life is also at risk. So as far as having a right to life, it looks like the fetus has a right to life and the mother has a right to life. So it looks like they're both equal. But Thomson says the mother has an additional right to make decisions about her body. And so that looks like it tips the scales in favor of the mother being able to make the decision to have an abortion. So therefore, it looks like abortion in this case is permissible. There's greater weight on the side of the mother making the decision to have the abortion. However, here is an objection from someone on the pro-life side that they can make. They might say something like this: however, abortion is directly killing, or in other words, it's kind of like murder, whereas doing nothing is letting die. So if the mom decides to have an abortion, that is directly killing. That's like murder. But if nothing is done and you let the natural course of events run and the mother ends up dying, that is kind of letting die. There is no act of murder going on anywhere, but you're just kind of letting nature take its course. And that is an act of letting die. And isn't killing worse than letting die? In other words, harmful acts are worse than harmful omissions. Harmful omissions are where you omit action. You don't do anything and you let, so to speak, nature take its course, and bad things might happen, such as the mother dying. However, harmful acts are worse than harmful omissions. All right, and then now we have capital T, which is shorthand for Thomson. Her response to this objection from the pro-lifer is this: but if the violinist is taking your life, we will say that it's morally permissible to unplug him. So once again, if you were hooked up to a violinist and the violinist needed to be hooked up to you in order to survive, if it ended up being the case that you were suffering grave health consequences because of it and you were about to die, in that situation, if you decided to unhook yourself from the violinist, that would be morally acceptable in that case. And she says, well, likewise in the violinist case, if the violinist is taking your life and you're going to die if you stay hooked up to the violinist, then likewise the mother who is going to die if she carries out the pregnancy to term, in that situation, she also has the right to make the decision to have an abortion. So what Thomson concludes is that thus the extreme view of pro-life is wrong. So Thomson has brought forth two counterexamples to the extreme view that all abortion is morally wrong. Right? Thomson has argued that in cases where a mother's life is at risk, in cases where a woman has been raped and becomes pregnant because of it, in those situations, the woman can have an abortion. Okay, then next what Thomson does is Thomson looks more deeply at this question: what is having a right to life? Right? You have a right to life, I have a right to life. What does that entail? What does that mean, having a right to life? She says having a right to life, something having a right to life, is not having the bare minimum to survive. It doesn't mean that you have the bare minimum, the right to the bare minimum to survive. Because you don't have a right, for example, for a famous star to touch your hand. So she gives this other kind of thought experiment where she says, well, you have the right to life, and let's say you are suffering from some terrible illness and you're about to die. But it just so happens if, let's say, your favorite movie star flies all the way from California all the way to where you are and touches your sweaty brow while you're in the hospital, then you will live. Let's just say in this hypothetical situation that that's the case. Well, in this situation, since you have the right to life and you're a person, does that mean that it's morally incumbent, it's morally required that this famous star, your most favorite star in Hollywood, has to fly over to touch your sweaty brow? No, the star is not morally required for the star to do something like that, right? If they want to go about living their life, or let's say they're in the middle of working on a movie and they have to complete it, it's not morally required that they hop on a plane to fly to your hospital and touch your sweaty brow. So what she's trying to point out in this case with this example is that just because you have the right to life doesn't mean that you have the right to the bare minimum to survive, whatever that might take. So hence, the right to life doesn't necessarily entail that one has a right to use another's body to survive. What she does say, though, in regards to this question, what is having a right to life, she says, the right to life is a right not to be killed unjustly. That is what is entailed by having a right to life. If you have a right to life, this doesn't mean you have a right to whatever it takes for you to survive. For example, if you decide to stop working and you just want to bum around because you have the right to life, it doesn't mean that it's morally required for other people to feed you because you're starving to death. So the right to life is a right not to be killed unjustly. So that's what's entailed, that you should not be killed without good reason. There could be good reason for one to be killed. She allows that possibility. But it's just that if you have the right to life, you should not be killed unjustly without good overriding reasons for it. So she says, thus pro-lifers must show that abortion is unjust killing. So that's the burden that pro-lifers have to show, is that in cases of when a woman has been raped or when the mother is going to die if she carries the pregnancy out to term, that this is a situation of unjust killing if the abortion is carried out. However, she says abortion due to cases of rape and when the mother's life is at risk are not unjust killings. And once again, she's given arguments by arguing based on these kinds of thought experiments, such as with the violinist. Okay, and I'll give you time now to think, or you should press pause to think about Judith Jarvis Thomson's arguments up to this point, and whether you think there are any weaknesses or flaws to it. Okay, so next she discusses a different kind of scenario, right? She's discussed situations in which a woman has been raped and becomes pregnant because of it. She's also discussed situations when a mother's life is at risk. Now she wants to discuss situations in which contraception is used properly, but a pregnancy still occurs. Right? There are forms of contraception that are 99% reliable, but that leaves that 1% possibility, right, that pregnancy can occur. So what about in these kinds of cases where people use contraception properly, but a pregnancy still occurs? Would an abortion be morally permissible in these kinds of situations? And she then uses another thought experiment in regards to contraception pregnancies. And this is supposed to be somewhat analogous or have some features in common in regards to contraception pregnancies. And her example is that of opening a window for air. So she actually gives several. One is opening a window for air. Let's say you do open your window for air and a burglar comes in through the window and decides to stay in your house because you opened up the window and to get some fresh air in your place. Burglar comes in. Does that mean that the burglar has a right to stay in your apartment or house? And she says, obviously not. But the fact that you open your window, that leaves open the small possibility. Well, if you live in a very dangerous neighborhood, it could be a very large possibility, but opening the window, that means you did it yourself, and you know that there's a possibility if you open your window that some stranger could come through that window, no matter how small that is, there's that small possibility that it could happen. So doesn't that mean that you're responsible? And therefore the burglar has a right to stay in your place? And she says, no, of course not. The burglar does not have a right to stay in your place. She brings forth another thought experiment that she tries to make analogous to cases of contraception pregnancies. She says, imagine there's a situation where there are people seeds, and these people seeds are seeds that kind of drift in the air. And if they can take root, such as in carpet, they will take root and they will grow into people. And let's say there are people seeds that drift in through a window in your house, where you open the window, but since you perfectly know that there are people seeds floating around outside, you put up a screen, right? A screen in your window to block people seeds from coming in. And it's a highly reliable screen. Let's say 99% reliable, that it will block people seeds. However, there was a defect in the screen, and a person seed comes in and plants itself into your carpet and begins growing into a person. Does the people seed, which is now planted and growing into a human in your carpet, does that itself have a right to life in this case? You can't destroy it or uproot it. You have to let it stay in your house and let it continually grow in this situation. And she says, it seems like to me that no, that you have the right to get rid of this person seed. So she concludes, thus some abortion is unjust, but when contraception is properly used, it may not be. So she's saying, there can be cases where abortion is unjust, but when contraception is properly used, you have two consenting adults and they're using this contraception, she says it may not be unjust for them to have an abortion. She says may because she's not exactly sure if her argument is strong enough or good enough in this case. So she leaves some leeway. She thinks that maybe in this case, in regards to contraception pregnancies, maybe there might be some weaknesses or flaws in it. Okay, so next what she discusses is this real life situation about Kitty Genovese. And in this situation, there was a woman who was being killed, an innocent woman being killed out in the open in public. And there were 38 witnesses who saw the event occur, but no one called the cops, no one tried to stop it from happening. And she gives this, uses this idea of a good Samaritan. So Good Samaritan is a story that comes from the Bible where there is a person who is a Good Samaritan, where they find someone of a different kind of opposing ethnic group. As they're walking on the road, they find this other person from this opposing ethnic group who is injured severely on the side of the road, beaten up badly. And this Good Samaritan goes way out of his way to help this person. Take them to, for example, a hotel, give them treatment, and take care of them, pay for their stay, etc. So with this notion of a Good Samaritan, what comes with it is this idea of going over and above the call of duty and really going out of your way to be a good person in this case. And so a Good Samaritan, Thomson says, in the Kitty Genovese case, will intervene, right? Would step to the plate and stop the assailant from killing Kitty Genovese. However, you can be kind of a shade lower. You can be a minimally decent Samaritan. They will call the police. A really good Samaritan would try to intervene and risk their own life, but you can still be a minimally decent Samaritan and call the police when you see this kind of murder taking place. And what Judith Jarvis Thomson says is that in this situation, it's not morally required for you to be a good Samaritan, but what is morally required for you is that at minimum, you should be a minimally decent Samaritan, and you have a moral obligation to call the police. And she says it may be morally required to be minimally decent, but not good. And this also applies to the case of abortion. In cases where a woman is justified in having an abortion, so those cases such as cases when a woman has been raped or when a mother's life is at risk, in those kinds of cases where a woman is justified in having an abortion, they are not morally required to be good Samaritans. A good Samaritan in this case will carry the child to term. So in this situation, it's not morally required of you to be a good Samaritan. You can if you want to. So in these kinds of situations, it would still be morally permissible for a woman to have an abortion in these kinds of cases.